Welcome back, Night Owls. This is Dr. Nighttime, and tonight we're going through another example of math so bad it ought to be a crime. Probably isn't a crime because of some legal loopholes, but to my mind it ought to be. I'm calling this, It's Not Paranoia When They Really Are Out to Get You, how British newspaper The Guardian dismisses reliable statistics on the Israel-Hamas war and tries to peddle biased statistics. So what do? They say there's some secrets revealed, right? Israeli military's own data indicates civilian death rate of 83% in Gaza war. No, that is not actually what the Israeli military's own data indicate. Figures from classified IDF database listed 8,900 named fighters as dead or probably dead in May, as overall death toll reached 53,000. What they're trying to say is that, well, Israel can only name almost 9,000 known terrorists as having been killed, so they know who they were, and they can state, we're pretty sure this was the impact that killed them, or for some other reason, we have reason to believe that they're no longer alive. That is a ridiculously high bar when trying to distinguish between civilians and combatants. It's completely unrealistic to insist that an army be able to name the individual soldiers that they're attacking. Also, they're trying to mix and match data from two unrelated lists. They're looking at the 53,000 confirmed dead from the Gaza Ministry of Health, and this list. By the way, the reason why that list was classified in all likelihood has nothing to do with trying to keep the true number secret. It has to do with, well, how did they get those names? Probably through some sort of spy work, and if Hamas is able to see whose names are or are not on the list, they can figure out who the spies are. Now, there are people putting the number of militants killed as high as 20,000. I'll show you why that number is very believable. And civilian to combatant ratio as low as 1-to-1. That 1-to-1, I've seen a couple of people's math on that. That I do not think is reliable. Generally, that is based on either throwing in assumptions about how many of the deaths were actually caused by Hamas misfires, and assuming that all the deaths caused by Hamas weapons misfiring was a civilian, right? And also the false assertion that the official records are counting all dead, not all war-related dead. So back in March, a graphic like this was going around. I've overlaid another graphic on top of it. I'll explain what those are. But this, with the red and the blue dots, that's reported deaths by age and gender in the Gaza Strip. You notice this huge spike for males, especially males above age like 13 to 15, right, old enough to actually be a teenage soldier. What would you do to try to go from this to try to infer how many of the deaths were targeted combatants as opposed to civilians, right? Well, you could assume that any civilian is as likely to be killed as any other civilian, maybe. And under that assumption, if we're going to look at the number of deaths under age 10, right? Suppose that anyone that young can't be a soldier. And if we assume that, especially given the gender roles that there tend to be in those extra religious countries, that women are not combatant soldiers. So if we were to look at the number of people who died in that extra young age range and say, let's extrapolate that out based on what we know about Gaza's age population pyramid, you get these lines here in the red and the blue that I've overlaid, and you can see the red approximately fits the actual numbers for women, and for younger boys, right, it fits, and then once the boys get to be around age like 13 or so, start to be in more dangerous situations, let's say, quite likely that dangerous situation being riding along with Hamas members, and if you can't actually be firing stuff, right, maybe helping bring supplies, maybe these older men might be working as the drivers. But if you crunch the numbers on it, you'll find that under this model, around 2/3 of those killed would be civilians, right? If you just say, okay, let's look only at the civilians, right? If you were to extrapolate those percentages out across the full population, you'd be looking at around 2/3 killed suggesting a 2-to-1 civilian to combatant casualty ratio. Given that by now there have been a bit over 60,000 casualties, that would correspond to the roughly 20,000 terrorists that was quoted. Now, that might not be corroboration. That might have been where that figure came from, in which case it's kind of circular corroboration. But, yeah, something like this is not consistent with the 5-to-1. Anyone who saw that number, you should be really scratching your head wondering, well, I've got these two drastically different indications from sets of data. How do I reconcile that? And the obvious answer should be, well, this list of named fighters is an incomplete list of all fighters. So, no, to try to indicate, especially if you can always assume that a lot of people will read a headline and not the full article. If this headline suggests that Israel has been killing a whole lot of civilians, and reliable data would not back that up, in an age where people are recommending that financial retribution be made against Israel, and you have something like this from a popular newspaper, then, yeah, if they cannot be sued for part of the financial damages, then there's something wrong with the justice system. My guess is they probably can't be sued, and so there's something wrong with the justice system. Hence my assessment, it probably isn't a crime, but it ought to be one. So, overall, when we start talking about how the mainstream media are biased against Israel, stuff like this is what we're talking about. We've found ourselves in a day and age where it is socially acceptable to spread false or misleading statistics against Israel. This is absolutely not okay. Until next time, this is Dr. Nighttime wishing you a good night.